Assalamu alaikum, hello and welcome to the Health Show here only on the Islam channel with me, Alistair Greener. Looking at how you can change your health and lifestyle for the better, the Health Show offers an alternative viewpoint from our health experts who attend the show. And we really hope that this will guide you in the right direction. So if you suffer from any medical issues or have any health concerns, or for that matter, if you know anybody who does, then tune in each week as we'll be covering a wide range of topics and offering alternative viewpoints from our health experts who attend the show. Now, if you'd like any further information on our programme or any of the topics that we discuss, then please do get in touch at healthshow@islamchannel.tv, and we'll give that address out at the end of the show as well. Today, we're talking about obesity. We'll be looking into weight gain, healthy diets, and how obesity could lead to the need for surgery. To discuss today's topic, I'd like to welcome Mr Majid Hashemi, a senior bariatric surgeon and consultant, as well as a senior lecturer at University College London Hospitals. Mr Hashemi has over 24 years' experience in upper gastrointestinal and bariatric surgery, providing private weight loss surgery and treatment for gastric and esophageal conditions at the Hospital of St John and St Elizabeth in North London. Welcome to the show.
Assalamu alaikum.
It's such a big issue, isn't it? You know, when we talk about weight loss, we've got a lot to get through today. So again, thanks very much indeed for coming on the show. But before we talk more with Mr Hashemi, let's take a look at how the South American country of Chile is attempting to combat obesity. It's doing it by adding labels to products that are high in calories, sugar, fat and sodium, all in the hope that it will help consumers make better health choices.
Bueno, la ley de etiquetado de alimentos fue planteada para una implementación gradual, lo que significa que los límites máximos que deben tener los nutrientes críticos en los productos se van a ir aumentando en 3 años.
Creo que es una muy buena ley, ya sobre todo con el tipo de comida, saber identificarla, tener más conocimiento, y creo que también falta, que no es 100% efectiva, porque la gente sigue comprando la etiqueta por el sabor y por falta más información televisiva.
La obesidad sigue en aumento, el aumento ha sido sostenido y para el Ministerio de Salud una de las prioridades es la obesidad. ¿Por qué? Porque produce enfermedades crónicas o enfermedades que son las principales causas de muerte en Chile.
Evito comprar los que tengan más 6. Compro los de menor cantidad de azúcar o de calorías.
So, Mr Hashemi, it's really interesting watching that because that's showing the problem in Chile of weight and obesity. What about here in the UK? We hear a lot about it. What's the real picture about obesity at the moment?
I think the problem is global. It is associated with what we call westernization or modernization, and it's worldwide, east and west. It's no longer just a European problem. And the problem obviously is multifactorial. We talked about the sugar tax here in the UK, and I think I didn't hear any mention of any taxation or increased prices there in Chile, but I think hitting people in the pocket, as it were, or making it more expensive to buy unhealthy food might be a factor.
That is an interesting thing, isn't it, when you look at the picture, because actually the gentleman there said in the VT, didn't it, you know, it's all very well labelling it and 1 or 2 people might change their habits, but actually when it tastes good and it's not any more expensive, and actually often these foods are the cheapest foods, you know, it's not necessarily making a difference.
And I think what I was actually getting at is the amount of the access we have to cheap, high sugar, high calorie, high carbohydrate food is not going to be overcome by merely labeling it. And I think labeling is useful alongside all other measures. And the other measures, again, would all need to be implemented together in parallel. So labeling is educational. it's good. But you need to educate the public, you need to educate the health professionals. I think it's also generational. I think the younger generation, our kids growing up nowadays, are a lot more aware of what is high calorie, what isn't. You get many teenagers who are vegan diets, vegetarian diets, and so on. But the older generation, I had a patient this morning, I explained for about 10 minutes about a low-fat diet. They said, so butter's okay at the end of that. And so it's very hard to, and it's the same with, you know, my parents and aunts and uncles, they will not have that awareness. So I think education is essential, but alongside all the other measures. And less access to the bad foods would help. And
what are the sort of things, because here in the UK, you know, you talk about less access to the bad foods. So there is things like the sugar tax. There's talk about, you know, changing advertising standards so that, you know, certain fast food companies can't advertise during, you know, sort of kids' meal times and things like that. There's a lot of things being tried. In your view, what's the kind of direction that we should be going when it comes to education?
I think you mentioned children's meal times, and I think it starts at school, and I think it's already having an effect. I think our teachers are aware, and our people at school are more aware, but it's only one part of the approach. In terms of access, you mentioned advertising, but actually, when I go into a petrol station, or if I go into any shop, the unhealthiest, high-calorie, sugary food is nearest the counter, encouraging me to buy it. And just as we've taken that approach with other things which are unhealthy and proven to be unhealthy, like cigarettes and alcohol, I think we should be serious about sugar and unrefined sugar. And why is it always right next to the till when you're paying? And I think that's a very easy thing to combat. It doesn't have to be legislation. It could just be a commercial incentive. Let's
look at the actual causes of obesity itself. Let's talk about the actual subject. First of all, what's the definition of obesity? We hear about weight loss, we hear about that. When do you become obese? We use,
in order to be able to measure and compare, we use the body mass index. And the body mass index is calculated by taking a person's weight in kilograms and dividing that by their height. Now, it was not just their actual raw height, it's the height in meters. So, for example, a height of 1.7 meters, and then you square it. So you times 1.7 to 1.7 times their height, so you get a square of the height, and you divide that into their weight. And from that, you get a body mass index. Overweight is anyone whose body mass index is over 25. Obesity is anyone whose BMI, body mass index, is over 30. And the various categories continue after that to the super obese and so on, which we say is over 40. And then we hear this term morbidly obese. Morbidly obese is over 35, and the super obese would be over 40. And it helps us as clinicians, as healthcare professionals, to categorize patients, if you wish, into kind of channel them into the right therapies. So we have various cutoffs for various treatments that we offer. Let's look at obesity. You talked about children there and adults, and with the education and with the amount of knowledge that we now have about our health and about our weight, where is the biggest problem with obesity today? Is it in the young, is it in the middle-aged, or is it in the elderly? Essentially the problem is intake versus expenditure. And we gain weight gradually. It's never sudden, overnight, it's gradual, and the intake is more than what we use. But how that happens is multifactorial. It's a reduction in activity, a more sedentary lifestyle, less exercise, and there are other factors to consider. One of the things which I really emphasize in my clinic is actually the daytime routine. Just as we are with our toddlers, when we realize that routine is essential for them and structured meal patterns, I find that a lot of my very overweight patients or obese or super obese patients, they don't have a structure to their eating and their meal times. Important things is to actually reintroduce structure to meal times. Sleep is also essential. There are plenty of studies out there showing poor sleep is associated with obesity and obesity-related illnesses. So they all come together. And when I see a patient in clinic who's coming to me for surgery, alongside that, I worked very hard to address their daily routine, asked them to have structured meals at regular times and intervals, and I asked them to try to improve their sleep, and I do go quite a bit into that as well. Sleeping earlier, for example, has a big impact.
Now, there's a lot of talk at the moment, isn't there, about the different diets. I mean, the diet industry has been a huge industry for decades now. Let's talk about some of the things that people maybe misunderstand, they don't get because there's a misperception out there. You know, one of them being, you know, about starving, one of them about these very low-calorie meal replacement diets, you know, the exercise, all these different things. What are some of the common misconceptions that people have about their weight and what they can do and what they can't do?
Thank you for that, because I think the problem is not so much the diets. The industry will continue to thrive for, I'm sure, decades to come. And we always want something which is relatively accessible to fix it. But in essence, the things to avoid are starvation diets, going to below 1,000 calories in a sustained fashion is not healthy. What you lose in the first couple of months in that sort of rapid starvation diet is muscle bulk. Immediately the first few days you might be encouraged. You'll see you've lost a couple of kilograms, but it's fluid you've lost, it's water. After the first couple of days, for the first few weeks, it's muscle mass. When you then regain the weight, you will regain that weight as fat. And this is taking the worst case scenario. We've done a crash diet without doing all the things alongside it. So the first thing about dieting, I would say, give yourself time, give yourself 3 months or 6 months or a year, and plan it so you can sustain it for 3 months, 6 months or a year. The second thing I would say is it needs to be part of a restructuring of your lifestyle, and alongside that comes exercise. Now, it doesn't have to be what again has become a fashion of high metabolic, inverted commas, training, push your heart rate up to 130 or 40, which I would not recommend, actually, for a lot of people who are overweight, who've been sedentary. But it's just regular exercise, again, at the level which you can sustain for 3 months, 6 months, or a year. It needs to be long-term. And I have many patients who come asking for surgery where I postpone the discussion for a year. I give them time to lose that weight, if they can, by other means. And if someone isn't yet in the morbidly obese, super obese category, I think there's a realistic chance of getting to a healthier weight with a complete holistic program.
There's lots of different diets out there, and each of them have their advocates that people will say they like it. They love going on the maybe low-calorie diets. They love going maybe on an exercise plan or having something where they're supported and they go to classes and things. How do you determine what can work for you?
It's a very individual thing. I think the one thing about these diets is it's very hard to do a diet long-term on your own without support of a partner, family, or a group. And usually the first step I see a lot of my patients taking is they get out of the house, they find a time in the diary, they go to a local meeting of whatever it is, or they pick a date with a friend and start. The biggest problem we all have in life is procrastination. We were talking about this earlier. And people, it's very easy to keep putting it off. And so you actually need to get your diary out and put the date in and do it with somebody else. And it's not easy to embark on this on your own. And I find the groups do well. Generally, patients who enroll in groups, and again, commercially, there's a huge amount available. In fact, you know, within our own surgical programs, we have patient support groups, and we find that patients genuinely do support each other, and you learn off each other, and actually, you gain your encouragement in that group as well.
Let's just talk a little bit about the differences and some of those myths out there. So first of all, is weight a genuinely genetic issue for people? In other words, if you're, forget copying their habits, but if your parents are like, if they're overweight, does that mean that you're going to?
No, I think let's put that aside.
That's an excuse.
Yes.
Okay. You talked about sleep, and that was really interesting, that how sleep can affect our weight. Tell us a bit more about that.
There are studies, actually. I would throw in stress alongside sleep, and again, it's not an excuse. We've identified that people who become diabetic, in fact, many illnesses, follow on after a certain time lag after stress. I think it might be several years after a period of prolonged stress that patients might become pre-diabetic, and that's associated with the obesity. Now, is it the eating pattern has changed during that period of prolonged stress? Is it the sleep has changed? So stress is there as well, and I think many people can identify something maybe 4, 5, 6, 7 years back from when their weight increase onset started. Sleep is important for several reasons. I think the value of sleep in itself, I'm not going to go into. I'm not a sleep specialist necessarily, but the timing I use a lot in my clinic, because I find a lot of my professional patients particularly are nighttime eaters, and a lot of them sleep late. And probably about half of the calories they take in is from that 8 p.m. when they get home till midnight or 1 a.m. My patients from the Gulf quite often have that sort of eating pattern. They don't really eat very well during the day. It's all packed into those 6 or 7 hours.
And you talked earlier on a lot about habits and changing those habits. Give us a few other sort of tips like that, well, stop eating late. What about this whole adage, a big breakfast sets you up for the day? What's that old saying? Eat like a king,
I
lunch
think if you
and so
take
on.
two sets of people who have the same intake and the same calorie and the same quality of stuff, and if one of them is having most of that in the daytime, particularly in the morning before their activity, and the other group is having it at night before sleeping, then the latter group who's having it at night before sleeping will gain more weight. And in fact, that's exactly how the sumo wrestlers, professional sumo wrestlers in Japan, gain the weight. They have 4,000 calorie meals at lunchtime, and they have a 3-hour nap after that, and they pile on the weight. So I think eating before you're sleeping is a guaranteed way to gain the weight. I think at nighttime eating, I encourage my patients to try to cut down on. And having a breakfast, I think, really does help. So it is about restructuring your day. It's not just the quantity.
Older people, and we have many who watch this show, they become concerned because of their activity level. And there's also this thing that people say is that as I get older, my metabolism slows down. Is that one of those folklore things, or does that actually happen?
It is a fact that as you're older, it is harder to lose the weight. And I am very sympathetic to those in their 60s, 70s who have musculoskeletal problems, arthritis, and can't get around, or just from their role in the family and culturally and habits, they are not able to access activities. And so they become by default more sedentary. I'm very sympathetic to patients like that, or people like that before they're patients. And I would urge them that not to concentrate so much on the weight loss in terms of the grams and the kilograms of weight loss they're going to achieve, but concentrate on the healthier eating. And by adopting, again, a healthier lifestyle with a healthier, more balanced diet, with a longer-term plan, I think they will improve their health without necessarily losing a huge amount of weight. Now, we have to, it's again, not one size fits all. If your BMI is 40 and you're diabetic, you're never going to really achieve sustained significant weight loss and resolution of all your illnesses. If you're overweight or obese, 25 to 30 BMI, yes, you can get yourself down into the lower category. And if you're younger, you can address things and they're reversible. If you're older, they're less reversible. So a lot of it depends on your individual circumstance.
And just before we go to break, I just want to talk about the psychological side, because a lot of people, it's easier said than done. We talked about procrastination earlier on, this whole thing that we want to eat less, but actually there's something in our brains that's, maybe we have mental health concerns, maybe there's something that's preventing us from doing it, and actually we're maybe eating as some form of psychological prop.
It's a fact that when we do the surgery or when we diet, we try to readjust how we think about food, how we approach it. I work very closely with mental health psychologists and clinical psychologists, both groups. Several things. I think a lot of our eating patterns are learnt and they can be unlearned, or in fact we may have been taught very well as toddlers and children, but we pick up bad habits. So again, the structure. I think the second thing is what has become very interesting, a topic which is being researched now actively, is how as individuals, we internalize things about our weight. And this is really in patients who are more overweight or obese. What society says about them, what society thinks about them openly, they then internalize, and it has a huge impact on people's self-esteem and subsequent motivation. If your self-esteem is down, you're not motivated to get up in the morning.
And then it becomes that vicious circle, doesn't it?
And that's, again, why I think being in a group and picking that date in the diary is key. It's very hard to start on these programs, whatever the program, whether it's a diet or even if it's a surgical program you want to go down, on your own. It's very, very difficult. So the psychology is definitely there, and we treat patients psychologically alongside the surgery. Some don't need it, some find that the surgery is the boost, but we have psychologists basically who are involved with the patients to help them relearn eating patterns after we operate.
And the big thing really is, of course, is get professional help, because there's so many people with such a wide range of expertise, whether it's, you know, you have a psychological issue, whether it's, you know, the lack of activity or whatever it is, there's somebody nutritionally or all sorts of things. There's a lot of people out there who can help.
I think very much so. And we're lucky in the UK that as a group, health professionals and allied health professionals are very, very aware. It's taken about a decade, 2 decades to get there, but you can find any dietitian anywhere in the country, and they will know the triggers to send you, at what point they would send you to a physician, at what point they would want the physician to send you to a surgeon, and GPs are very much on board as well.
In fact, that's a perfect place to take a break, because that's exactly what we're going to be talking about after the break, getting that level of professional help if you do need to go to the next stage. At the moment, thanks very much indeed. But we should stress that should you suffer from any medical problems or health concerns, it's always highly recommended that you contact your doctor or GP, as the Health Show gives you an alternative viewpoint to the health concern being discussed. As we said, we're going to be talking about surgery and other things that you can do to help with obesity. That's straight after this break. Welcome back to the Health Show, where our topic today is obesity. We're delighted to be joined in the studio by senior bariatric surgeon and consultant, Mr Majid Hashemi, and we've been discussing the steps to take for a healthy lifestyle. In this, the second part of our programme, we're going to be taking a look at the prospect of undergoing surgery to deal with obesity. To give you an insight of how serious the issue of extreme weight can be, we're going to take a look at a clip where a 32-year-old Mexican who, at 595 kilos, was known as the most obese man in the world.
Ahora sí que, primero que todo, levantarme aquí. Quisiera, pues ahora sí que empezar a caminar, tengo pensado, pues, a ver si puedo hacer una fundación o algo así. Entonces, pues ya el tiempo lo dirá, ya el tiempo, ahora sí que hablará, y pues estamos echándole ganas.
Va muy rápido en su recuperación. Nosotros pensamos que iba a ser más difícil, pero pues estamos viendo que va avanzando, y pues muy contentos porque no tuvo complicaciones, nada, entonces pues ahí vamos.
No sé qué tienen tus ojos, no sé.
Again, watching those pictures, you're struck by the sheer size that some people can get to. And of course, it has a major impact on just every bit of their health, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, that is extreme. But even at a body mass index of 35, people who are average height 100 kilograms or so, the illnesses start. And it's well established, and I'm sure most of your viewers understand the illnesses that go with it. You don't just feel awful and tired and fatigued and so on and so on. Your mobility is reduced, you can't do things. this gentleman can't walk. He's depending on oxygen through those nasal cannula that he had, basically supplying oxygen because he can't ventilate his lungs adequately because of the weight. That is extreme, but before that, the illnesses pile on. And it's sad to see when it is so advanced, because some of it is reversible early on in younger people before they get to that extreme level. When you go on with it after 5-10 years, the illnesses become irreversible. And you have a shortened lifespan. You have a high risk of blood pressure, heart attacks, strokes, diabetes. We've got studies showing the effects on libido, on ventilation, on absolutely everything. And it affects you at a cellular level as well. So
now, for people who get to a serious level of obesity, they've tried lots of different diets, there's lots of different things. At what point is it made, who makes the decision that actually surgery is an appropriate action for certain individuals? How does that decision come about?
Thank you for asking. I think we touched earlier on how we use the BMI, and it tends to work quite well that we use the body mass index figure that we have for an individual as a cutoff. For example, body mass index 35 and above would allow you to enter for consideration for bariatric surgery. Body mass index below 35, we tend not to discuss bariatric surgery. So that's one cutoff. The second point, which we again touched on, is that thankfully in the UK and in Europe, our healthcare professionals are now, in 2019, aware of what we have to offer. In the early days, 2001, when I started, I was often confronted by very, very intelligent, very highly educated healthcare professionals who regarded it as cosmetic. And it was an uphill struggle for the first decade, convincing people that actually obesity surgery, or anti-obesity surgery, bariatric surgery as we call it, can transform lives. And alongside that, that there are people whose weight and illnesses have got to the stage where going to the gym and doing what we talked about earlier, restructuring their life, dieting, cutting down the overall calorie intake, is not going to do it. It's not going to be enough to get them down to that healthier weight. And I think if you're overweight, between BMI 25 to 30, by all means, do all of those things. Get onto a program, give yourself 3 to 6 months, 1 year. But if you're in the body mass index 40 category, do those as well. But it's not going to be enough to get you back to a full, active, functioning person again.
And what about the challenge that some people might just see, you know what, I'm just going to go for an operation, a little bit like, almost like a magic pill, that actually that will solve it. Do you have some form of screening to be able to prevent that kind of thought process?
Exactly that. We don't want the surgery to be regarded as a quick fix. It will not work effectively on its own. It has to be done alongside everything else. And so we are very, very concerned if patients haven't taken measures already. I tend to send people away to have a go, at least at getting, and I'm not looking to see how many kilograms they've lost. I just want to see that they are healthier a little bit. Because once you've had the surgery, your eating pattern will change. And it's about sustaining that weight loss. It's not just, we can achieve it. It'll take 18 months, 1 year. You'll come down to the sort of weight you might want with the surgery. But sustaining that over the next decade. And for that, you do need to restructure your life, eating patterns, and everything else.
And we'll come to that in a moment, the aftercare part, because obviously that's the crucial part, keeping that weight off. So talk me through, let's say, for example, there's somebody watching or they know somebody who's considering bariatric surgery. How would that happen? Does it start with the GP recommending them?
Pretty much always you will need a GP referral. Sometimes it's prompted by an orthopedic specialist, a gynecologist. If you're undergoing fertility treatment, for example, we have a lot of patients who cannot become pregnant because they are very high BMI. So it's sometimes prompted by a specialist, but all referrals in the NHS tend to go through the GP, and it would be a GP referral to a local specialist hospital which offers bariatric surgery. And the private side, GP referrals are technically not essential, but it's nice to know that the patients have thought about it, and sometimes having past medical records showing attempts at weight loss or addressing the weight issues is helpful. Then in the clinic, we focus a lot on the things we talked about today, what measures patients have taken up to that point. And then a lot of my time is then spent on assessing the patient's general fitness, what their potential risks are. The surgery nowadays, thankfully, is done so often that it's become a lot safer, but it is still major surgery. So I always regard it in terms of risks and benefits. And because patients have become overweight, they carry other illnesses, I spend quite a bit of time assessing the risks of those comorbidities, we call it, the illnesses you have as a result of your obesity, and put them alongside the potential benefits you have to gain from surgery. And pretty much always, in the patients we operate on, we've done a fair assessment to see that the benefits of the surgery will far outweigh the risks of the surgery, and that's why we go ahead. Very occasionally we find someone is prohibitively at high risk. They may have already had very established diabetes, heart disease, other things, or very old. If patients are in their late 60s, 70s, even early 60s, I worry a little bit about what we're going to achieve. So it's all about the risk-benefit. And generally, my ideal patient would be someone whose BMI is around 40, who's diabetic, and who's in their 30s, 40s, or younger if need be. And I love that because we can fix it. And we can do a relatively major op, but a routine op, a sleeve gastrectomy or a gastric bypass. And I know for a fact that they will lose 40 to 50% of their excess weight. Half of their excess weight will come off within about a year. And if the diabetes is not yet established, I know they'll come off medication. I know that they'll come off their CPAP mask, which they're using. I know their blood pressure will improve. Now, can I guarantee they will stay off all of those medications in 10, 15 years' time? It's hard because it's about sustaining that weight loss in the eating pattern.
Well, exactly. We talked about that before.
But they'll have a better chance at sustaining it than with a diet at that sort of weight category.
Okay. Just before we talk more about the actual physical surgery, you've mentioned already this is very much a medical surgery as opposed to cosmetic, and you talked a little bit there about how in the UK, fortunately, we're seeing it as medical rather than cosmetic. However, there are some cosmetic procedures out there that people might be tempted by. You know, we've seen stories like fat freezing and things like that. What's your take on those kind of more, what still are cosmetic procedures?
Yes. I'm very clear that the bariatric surgery is being done to improve a patient's health, and short-term, mid-term, and long-term. The cosmetic operations, some of them are very effective. Liposuction, for example, takes away a couple of kilograms of fat. Having a tummy tuck might reshape your abdomen. It might help self-esteem, it might help motivation. I'm not against that. I think there is definitely a place for those cosmetic ops, but they are not going to address the obesity. And that's the key. You cannot lose the weight by having liposuction or having a tummy tuck. And I get this asked a lot. And there is actually better place for the tummy tuck after you've had the proper substantial weight loss surgery. You've lost the weight. If you then have loose skin, and a tummy tuck will help get a better cosmetic result. Sometimes it's essential, actually. In people like the one we just saw, this gentleman here, he's going to have so much loose skin. He's going to have quite substantial, what we call massive body contouring surgery. He's going to have plastic surgery to take away the excess skin on his arms, thighs, legs. Otherwise, he's not going to have that mobility he wants. But the plastic surgery has a place, but it is not bariatric surgery.
Talk about the actual process itself. When somebody comes in for the surgery, it's been decided, yes, they're a suitable patient for the procedure.
Yes, yeah.
What does the actual procedure involve?
Well, we go through a pretty standardized preparation for the surgery. We check, as I've said, other illnesses for the patient. And then in the 2 weeks before the surgery, I put all my patients on what we call a liver shrinkage diet. And it's basically a low carbohydrate diet, basically avoiding starch and so on, to take the fat away from the liver. It makes the access for the surgery a bit easier, makes recovery a bit quicker. And it's actually quite good because it starts training the patient to how it feels without being able to eat and drink that much. I never like it if patients gain weight after they see me in the interval between seeing me and the surgery. It worries me because, again, I want them to be on board with it. The surgical options, in fact, I can just very quickly list what is available. there are about a dozen things out there. A lot of them are gimmicky, a lot of them are new, some things are still within trial stages, and I wouldn't recommend. The things which are tried and tested are the gastric band, the gastric balloon, the sleeve gastrectomy, and the gastric bypass. The gastric band is a keyhole op, sleeve gastrectomy is a keyhole op, and the gastric bypass. So they're all involving general anesthetics. They all involve making small cuts, they're all keyhole, in the abdomen. The gastric balloon is not a surgical operation. It involves putting a balloon in through the mouth, going in with an endoscope, putting a balloon in the stomach, and taking up space within the stomach. And basically, it's a restrictive operation. It takes up space, so patients cannot eat as much. If they do, they become full, uncomfortably so. And it is effective for the right people, and it does involve need to be removed after a year. So the disadvantage to the balloon is quite a high proportion of those patients who've lost the weight, once the balloon is out at the end of the year, may regain that weight. My favorite operation right now, my most frequently performed op, or the go-to operation, is the sleeve gastrectomy now. And I can explain briefly why. The gastric band I tend to do less, and again, it needs to be tailored to the patient, and the patient needs to work with us very closely with that. The sleeve gastrectomy is a little bit less dependent on adjustments and so on. In fact, it's not dependent on adjustments. You do the op and then that's it. And the patient is on their way to weight loss.
And looking at the weight loss itself, they've had the operation. How long does the physical recovery after one of these procedures normally take?
Patients after a gastric band stay 1 day. After a sleeve gastrectomy or bypass, they stay 2 days in hospital. So I have patients walking on the evening of their surgery and drinking, and the 24, 48 hours in hospital is just to allow them to get their strength back and get over the anesthetic. And they have a little bit of wound pain, for which we give oral paracetamol sometimes is enough. And I encourage activity. So most patients I encourage to get back to work within about 2 weeks. The only restriction I really place on activity is lifting weights for the first 3 or 4 weeks. And in terms of diet, patients are asked to stay on a liquid diet for 1 or 2 weeks, introduce a soft diet after the first 1 or 2 weeks, and at about between 2 weeks and 4 weeks to introduce a solid diet, so eating normally. And the idea is that you have a healthy, balanced diet, eating your meals with your family, your friends, at work, as you would, but at smaller portions, and healthier eating and better foods. And the bypass operation, for example, actually does change patients' food choices. If you have a bypass, I have many patients saying, you know, previously I would have fancied some chips. Now I go for the apple. So at least in the short to mid-term, the gastric bypass operation, which is one of the keyhole operations, changes how you your food choices, your cravings.
It's interesting because you said that before, didn't you, about, you know, all weight loss really fundamentally comes down to making choices and making better choices and changing habits long term.
Yes.
I want to talk a little bit about the exercise, because for a lot of people who become obese, it becomes this vicious cycle where they don't take exercise, they gain weight, and then they get to the point where they're not able to take exercise.
You can't anymore.
So how do you deal with that?
Well, it's physically you can't, and also it's difficult going to the gym when, you know, you're conscious of your shape and your weight, and the motivation just goes. So I think when patients see themselves physically losing weight loss in the first 6 months, first few months, straight after the operation, and they get encouraged with that, it hopefully has an impact on their self-esteem and going out, being out and about. And the second factor is just reducing that physical mass, that 20 kilograms extra on these knee joints, you know, 2 suitcases worth of extra weight. People have more energy, they can do more, and it does allow patients to get back to a good level of activity. And the point on that is I always tell my patients the same thing in the clinic after surgery: do something you can sustain for the long term. 2 sessions of gym, 45 minutes, twice a week, which you can do for 5 years, is a lot better than 5 sessions of the gym, which you do an hour and a half intensely, which actually I don't encourage. I do not want patients or my overweight patients before surgery or after surgery to go straight into this very high intensity training, which is the hits and which people talk about. I much prefer they go for core strength activities and at least participating, and again, doing it in groups, therefore the gym.
One of the things that we notice over and over again on this programme is the fact that many people feel somewhat isolated in not being able to seek help, not being able to go to a specialist, go to someone who really understands the challenges that they might have with their weight. What would you say to somebody who may be watching, who it may be for themselves, maybe for a loved one or a friend, in terms of the help that's available to them when weight becomes a real problem?
These are the people we would love to get to, not necessarily speaking as a surgeon there, but as a health professional. Because if you've got to the stage where the disease are established and psychologically you've internalized a lot, it's very easy to have lost that motivation, to have lost the self-esteem. And it is difficult in people who don't have the support of relatives and a support network of friends or work. Very difficult. But those who have relatives or who have friends, then I think just accessing, and there is a very accessible, I think, healthcare system still here in the UK. We forget that. We have an amazing health service, which I've travelled a lot. I took a sabbatical and went to 3 or 4 different countries. And you cannot access the healthcare that we can in the UK. Even if it is seeing your GP and discussing it for a 10-15-minute consult, it's a start. And your GP will have ideas and they can channel you into local support groups. They may, occasionally some practices may still be able to access their dietitians. And if your BMI is in the 35 category, our GPs are very aware that bariatric surgery is on the cards. And we don't leave it to the GP to select the bariatric surgery for you. They're aware of that. We will do that in our bariatric surgical units. You go through what we call a one-stop assessment. When you come to a surgical unit in a hospital, you'll meet a nurse, you'll meet a dietitian, you'll meet the surgeon in one go in our clinic.
Lots of people
in our
helping
clinic.
Give me an idea, because it is hugely successful. You know, for many people, this absolutely is the answer for them when they are extremely obese. Give me, without obviously saying any names or anything, maybe just give me some examples of how transformative this surgery has been for some of your patients.
Well, I think the changes in the what we call comorbidities, the illnesses, it is for me very rewarding when I see someone who's on diabetic meds, on even just metformin, maybe not even insulin. In fact, insulin suggests the disease is more advanced, but on metformin, started as an adult, started within the last few years, someone who's previously fit and healthy but has become sedentary. Coming off that, straight after the surgery, they just do not take any more metformin or diabetic meds. That's really satisfying. The second thing which I think reverses dramatically is what we call the CPAP, continuous pressure ventilation, which patients rely on if they have sleep apnea. There's a mask that you wear on your face. This gentleman had non-stop oxygen. It's slightly different, but it's a similar sort of problem because in waking hours, he wasn't able to ventilate sufficiently. But the more common problem is sleep apnea, when patients have very poor sleep because they're not getting the oxygen because they're not ventilating at night. And they are dependent on these masks. We have a huge number of people out there dependent on these masks at night when they sleep. I don't know how people can fall asleep with them. I have so much sympathy for them. And it's really nice seeing them come back to the clinic a month after surgery, 2 months after, not needing CPAP anymore, not needing a mask when they sleep, sleeping normally. Obviously, alongside this, the usual things, you see the cosmetic effects, the people feel better, they dress better, they're out and about, they start making contact with people they've lost contact with and going out into society more. All of that's a given, and that's immensely rewarding to see. But for me, reversal of the early diabetes, remission of it at least, and of the sleep apnea are great to see.
Fantastic. And it is really transformative when you hear what can be done, the fact that something can be done, and the main thing is to go out there and seek help, go and see a GP, and there's a good chance that maybe people might come and see you. It's been great chatting, and it's been really, really interesting. So thanks very much indeed for coming on to the show. Really appreciate it. But unfortunately, that is all we have time for. And again, I'd like to thank our guest, Mr Majid Hashemi, again for coming in. As you heard, he's a senior bariatric surgeon and consultant, and it's been great that he's taken time out of his busy schedule to be with us here today. It's been a great insight, and I really hope that's been valuable to you, and we really appreciate all of that important information he's shared with us. Now, once again, we must stress that should you suffer from any medical problems or health concerns, it's always highly recommended that you contact your doctor or GP, as the Health Show gives you an alternative viewpoint to the health concern being discussed. As I said, unfortunately, that's all we have got time for. But if you'd like to find out more about this or any of the subjects we discuss on the show, please do email us at healthshow@islamchannel.tv. Again, that's healthshow@islamchannel.tv. Join us again next week with lots more to talk about, but goodbye for now. Assalamu alaikum.